And welcome back to another episode of Life Changing Challengers. Again, I'm your host, Brad Minus, and you are not going to believe who I have on the podcast today. I have Leslie Alvarez. Now, Leslie is huge in the community management space, but we're really not going to go into that. What she has done is gone through adversity over and over again and has always climbed out and done it in such amazing ways and like, oh God, I can't wait to talk to you about it. It's like you want to talk about unorthodox ways is what we talk about here on the show, people coming out of adversity in unorthodox ways. And Leslie is the epitome of it. She always found her way to succeed, and you're going to hear about it today. So consider yourself very lucky. And without further ado, Leslie, how are you today?
I am awesome, Brad. Thanks for having me with you today.
Oh, I am so grateful that you're here because you have an immense amount of messages and information that you could bring to the audience and add value. Leslie, first question. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and maybe the complement of your family, where you grew up, and what was it like to be Leslie as a kid?
Well, I was raised, my parents divorced when I was 5, and I was raised in inner city Houston, the part of town where it's a little ethnic, the Hispanic side of town. My great grandparents came from Mexico in 1902. And yet I was kind of mixed. So my mom had married a Caucasian. My last name was McDuffie, and I was growing up in what I like to call the Mexican hood. I didn't speak Spanish. I looked Hispanic, but I just kind of didn't fit in. My dad moved back to Georgia. I lived mostly with my grandmother. And yeah, it was just kind of one of those. I was a little bit of a bookworm, not an athletic person by any means. More likely, I would fall and skin my knee than I was to do anything athletic. I didn't ever really feel like I completely fit in. I was also raised really religiously. And so that made a huge difference because I wasn't allowed to associate with certain people that were not part of my church. So that really made me separate from other people and kind of be by myself a lot.
So you have siblings, right?
I was actually 10 when the first one was born.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're significantly younger. My one sister now, at our current ages of 46 and 36, we're getting close.
Oh,
But even at 36 and 26, we were still fighting. Like,
oh,
he couldn't understand where I was coming from at that point. We still didn't have anything in common, but now we actually think very much alike and have a lot in common.
oh, amazing. You know what? I gotta ask though, you said because you spent a lot of time with your grandmother, right?
Mhm.
Did you call her abuela? Did you call her grandma?
Well, she was Caucasian. So my
Okay.
grandfather, who was Mexican, married her, and she was Caucasian. So she was French, German, and English. I called her Nanny.
Oh, and that's different. Okay.
Yeah. Now, my Mexican grandfather, I called Pawpaw.
Pawpaw.
Mm.
Nana and Pawpaw. Wow. Okay. I love it. I just love that the different dynamics and what people call their families. I think it's interesting, It's not everybody does something different. Mima and Pawpaw and Nana and Pawpaw and grandma and grandpa. For me, it was grandma and Papa. That's how
Mhm.
it was for me. So anyway, so you had some interesting ideas growing up. You somehow came upon this ability to be more independent. How did that come about?
You know, I, if you ask my mother or my grandmothers, they will tell you that I was just always an independent child.
Okay.
I really feel like I was forced into early independence. My parents divorced when I was 5. There were already some things going on there earlier in life. And so I feel like I really was forced to be more independent. So I started, we were very low income. We were not even middle class. And so when I wanted to start, I wanted my first bike. I wanted a 10-speed red bike out of the Sears magazine, right? So I sold homemade oatmeal cookies to all my school teachers and my mom's friends at her job to save up the money to buy this. It was a $99 bike. And then with sales tax and shipping or whatever, it was going to be like $108. And so I sold these cookies for $4 a dozen till I saved up my $108 to be able to buy my red 10-speed bike.
That's amazing. I mean, no one does that. I listen, you and I are peers as far as age goes, a little bit older, but you know what I mean? And I had an entrepreneur father and he wouldn't let me do anything like that. but I kind of think that I would have been better off now if he would have let me do that. He was all about education, and he's like, no, 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 no. Your job is to be a kid and for you to grow up. It's my job to make sure that you're provided for. So old school, right?
Mm.
And if I wanted something, it was either put on Santa or you know what I mean? Yeah. Coming from a Jewish family, I had to put on Santa's list. So yeah, but I think it was amazing. It's something that you learned because you even went on and did even a little bit more of that later on, which we're going to get into. So so about high school, you had an interesting.
So again, I was raised super religious. I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, just to put it out there. I actually quit public school after 8th grade because I didn't want to be part of that environment because of the bad influences of the world. I wanted to devote my life to Christ and Jehovah and become what they call a full-time minister. To be able to do that, I needed more time in my life so I could spend more time out in the field service, out knocking on doors. So I quit public school at the end of 8th grade and actually did homeschool for high school. Knocked out high school in like a year and a half to 2 years. I finished when I was 15, and then I was done and I started working after that. I got a full-time job working in a law office, and the rest is history from there.
Wait a second. At 15?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. All right. So this is good. Hey, by the way, I just wanted to let you all know that I'm going to be giving you this title later, but I'm not giving you the title right now in the episode because there's a big portion of it that she's going to talk about that has to do with the title. So she's got a great book out. It's readable. It's kind of short, but it is packed with lessons. And hopefully she's going to touch on those today. So you started in the law office.
I did.
At 15, all right, I'm a high school graduate. I'm going to go work in an office.
Yeah. So I got a job and I was like the lead partner's assistant. I was running payroll for all the 30-something-year-old people that were working in the office. Nobody liked me. I mean, it was just one of those things from the very early age that I was always kind of in an outsider position, whether it was because of the religion or whether it was because I was surrounded by people at the church with kids that had their families intact. And I was the one child of divorce that everybody kind of looked down on. And then when I went to work, I was the young, eager overachiever that the older people were like, how is she already in that job? I mean, it's just always been kind of my life is people kind of looking at me like I was not quite fitting in with the group.
Wow, crazy.
I got married at 19. I left the church at 18, got married at 19, and then had my daughter 4 days after I turned 20.
And that's Adriana?
Ariana, yes.
Okay, cool. That had to take your life for a leap right there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was already in property management at that point in my career. I had started in the business and we were married and I had my baby girl and she was a sweetheart and I loved being with her, but I was a bit of a workaholic. The job that I was doing was not a 40-hour a week, get home every day at 5 o'clock with managing condo associations and HOAs. Took a lot of my nights away from being with her and really being, involved. So my mom and the babysitters and such really helped me with both of my children because I ended up having my son almost 3 years later. And it's the same thing. I don't really remember bathing my son his first year of his life. I had a daycare and a babysitter that because I worked so much, they bathed him. And when I would pick him up at 9 and 10 o'clock at night, he was already asleep and I would carry him to the car and then I'd carry him up to his bed. And then we'd wake up at 6 in the morning and I'd go do it all over again.
Well, wait a second. If you had him staying either at your nana's or your mom's, you were married. Where was your husband?
Yeah. So my husband made the decision in the middle of Tropical Storm Allison back in 2001. If you're familiar with that storm, it came through the Gulf and it hit Houston and then it traveled up to like San Antonio, but it sat over Texas for like over a week and it just saturated us. So we had tons and tons of flooding. And so he was missing for a couple of days. I didn't know where he was. I thought that he could be dead in a bayou somewhere, from being flooded, coming home from work or something. And come to find out he was with his other love. So he came home one day and went to the kitchen, grabbed a couple of black garbage bags, started throwing all his stuff in the garbage bag, says, I don't want to be with you anymore. I'm moving in with my girlfriend. And I was about 5 months pregnant with my son at the time.
What?
Yeah.
During the midst of a hurricane, didn't come home. Oh my God.
I actually even had just quit my job the month before because since I had worked so much with my daughter, I knew that having my son was going to be my second and only other child. I wasn't going to have any more kids after that. So I really wanted to enjoy the pregnancy and enjoy his childhood. So I had quit my job to stay home. So I had no income. I had no way to earn any income at that point because I couldn't go back to a job now that I'm 5 months pregnant. Nobody's going to hire me now, right?
So what did you end up doing?
So my mother-in-law pulled me aside and she didn't speak any English. She was a very poor, immigrant. They had come to the US in I think probably 76 or something. And then my ex-husband was born in 78. And she pulled me aside, had my little sister-in-law, who was only, I think she was like maybe 12 or 13 at the time, translate for me. And she says, look, I don't like what my son has done to you, but, I want to help you, but I can't because I don't have a lot to be able to help you with. So I can help you with what I can, and then you can help yourself. So she gave me $100 and a grocery list, and she sent me down to the store, down to the little La Tienda to buy all of the supplies. And I came back and she taught me how to make Mexican tamales. And so you got tamales, and especially down in Houston or down in Texas, any city, any border area, any border state knows this. You can sell them out of the back of your trunk on the side of the road with a cardboard box that says tamales. They really are a hot commodity. Back then, they would go for probably like $5 a dozen or something. Now I can sell them for more like $15 to $20 a dozen. Inflation is great sometimes. Um, but they are a lot of work, and that's why they're such a hot commodity. So you sell them by the dozen. It's a big family tradition, especially around the holidays, to get around with your grandmothers and stuff to make them. But since my grandmother was not Mexican and my grandfather, he was not, his parents had already long passed, I didn't have that Mexican connection growing up, even though I grew up in the neighborhood. I didn't have a grandmother that made tamales and taught me how to make tamales. So my mother-in-law did. And I went and I sold the tamales, and she said, now take the money and go back to the store and buy more supplies and do it again. And so I made tamales. I stood on my feet for many, many hours and made a lot of tamales and was able to pay some bills. My kids played travel teams, they played school teams, they were in the band. I had flutes to buy, I had trombones to buy, I had Washington D.C. 5th grade trips to pay for, you name it, extra expenses for the kids. And the child support and my income just never was enough. So I was able to supplement anytime I needed money, Christmas, if I lost my job and I had some time, anytime I needed it, by breaking out that tamale pot. So my mother-in-law really provided me a great life skill that gave me the ability to really take care of her grandkids well.
That's amazing. And it's the true testament to, you know, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day and be starving tomorrow. Teach a man to fish, or a woman in this case, and they'll be set for a lifetime. And you had a good teacher, and you seem to be able to go in and take care of things by making tamales. The title of her book is called When Life Gives You Lemons, Make Tamales. And now you know why. So anyway, I don't want to talk about the book till later. So you had your son, and your son was born on a very momentous day. There was a lot going
Yes.
on that day.
He was born on 9/11, 2001. Yes. His entire life, anytime they ask for the date of birth, the person who's writing it down always stops and looks at us and is like, really? We're like, yes, really. He was born at 6 p.m. that evening. So, when they ask you where you were and everybody remembers where they were, I was in the living room of my house pacing the floor because I felt like I was in labor. but my doctor kept telling me all weekend that it was probably false labor because it was a little early. And I was watching the news and watching everything happening. And so I was on the phone with my friends talking to them about what was happening. And I just kept saying, I think I'm in labor. I think I'm in labor. And they're like, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, I'm going to the doctor at 3 o'clock. So I guess I'll get checked, you know? So I got to the doctor at 3 o'clock and she took one look at me and she was like, well, I was in a contraction and I was on the scale and the doctor's like, has me been having any contractions? Like, yeah. They're like, how often? I'm like, well, I'm having one right now. And they're like, you wouldn't be able to stand on the scale if you were having a real contraction. So the doctor checked me and the doctor's like, yeah, you got to get to the hospital now. And so he was born like 3 hours later.
Wow. Yeah. And I'm not trying to get personal or anything, but how long was your labor with your daughter?
Oh my gosh, I was so miserable. I wanted to be not pregnant so badly that the moment I had my first contraction, I made the doctor put me in the hospital and start inducing. I was huge. I had gained so much weight. I was so miserable. I wanted to not be pregnant anymore. And so I was there for like 20 hours with a very slow induction because I was trying to go without pain meds. And the moment I finally gave in, and I said, "Give me an epidural." Or I said, "Give me a shot of Demerol." And they came in with an epidural instead. And my mom was going to send them back. Like, she's like, "No, she didn't want the epidural." I was like, "I'll take it. I'll take it. I don't care.
Yeah.
Give it to me." So they give me the epidural. She was born like 30 minutes later. As soon as my body relaxed, I was fine. But I was so tense that I was locked up and nothing would happen. And so once I relaxed from that epidural, she was easy breezy.
That's interesting that you were tensed up for your daughter and was 20 hours, and yet and you not only had the ability the you not only had the internal that you were giving birth to your son, but you also had 9/11 going on, and yet this was 3 hours and you were done.
Never thought of it like that, but as we're telling the story and comparing the two situations side by side, it actually is a little more telling about the children's personalities. Like my daughter is a little more uptight. She's a rule follower. She's dot her I's, cross her T's. My son is a lot more go with the flow, relax, chill. He only speaks when he has something that's really worth saying. Like he just takes his time, does what he wants to do. So like it's kind of telling that their personalities are a little aligned with the labor experience.
Wow, I
I
would
never
love to
thought of that. I've never thought of that before.
I would love to see a case study on that. You know what I mean? Wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
I'd love to get just a hundred mothers in a freaking room where that had at least two kids, and have them talk about their different labor experiences and figure out if they're in matching it to their personality
Yeah.
types. That would be super super interesting. So your first marriage, he left. Now was your son was from a different marriage.
No, my son was from the first husband.
Son was still from the first husband. Oh, yes, right.
Yeah, that's what
They're
I'm pregnant
dating.
with. Yeah.
So your kids are both from.
I only have one baby daddy.
Yeah. Okay. Good. 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 I think it was messing up on some of the dates. That's not a problem. It's good. That's good.
Okay.
Okay, because I know that you got married again
I did get
uh
married again.
a little bit later. So now you've got two kids,
Yep.
and are you still now? Are you working at this point?
So I went back to work, went back to what I knew. It was easy for me to get a position back again and back in property management. So I've been working back in community management ever since. So I went back to work a month after he was born.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so at this point you had regular income
Mhm.
and you supplemented when you needed to, right? With
Yes.
certain things, which I think is fantastic.
The internet was still kind of new, even. I
Yeah.
mean, email, everything was kind of new at that point. There was no Poshmark to sell your clothes on. None of that existed.
I can't e- I no one's ever mentioned that. That's amazing. I love it. I love it. So okay, so now you're living on your own. You
Yeah.
have a job, two kids
Yep.
are being taken care of. Now, are you still taking both kids now to nanas and moms and daycare or
Ended up getting a daycare. Yeah, they got a daycare. That's where I had a babysitter who kept them very late for me when I worked late. And so that's kind of the year or so that when I don't really remember bathing my son because I was working so much. But I was back out on my own and doing what I needed to do for them. And then my son, when he was about 2, and my daughter was close to 5, is when we moved to Atlanta. So I moved around the country a little bit, mostly for job opportunities. So not really to cities where I had any family or any network, but I moved to Atlanta. That was my first move when they were little because I thought that I had a network there as a backup plan. I wasn't super close to my dad's family, but they were there. And so I thought if something happened, I'd have them to fall back on. I saw them like twice in 2 years. They didn't have anything really to do with me. So it really didn't make a difference that they were in the same city or not, but that's why I picked Atlanta initially.
But yeah, you were looking for to have a secondary support system, which
Yeah.
you're all looking for. Now that it makes a good story to say that what were you still involved with your baby daddy, for lack of a better term?
We had been divorced. I mean, we were divorced. He was already living with somebody else and the whole 9 yards.
Right.
He had his visitation and he paid his child support and such. But yeah, so the kids still saw their father. They have a relationship with their father.
Right. And he was living in Houston?
He stayed back in Houston.
All right, awesome. I read the book. So I know that there's a couple of situations that popped up that I think that you were instrumental in getting through, and it shows a mental tenacity and emotional tenacity that a lot of people don't have nowadays. Were you in Atlanta when the first incident happened?
So I don't remember. There was a first incident that happened. There was first incident
didn't know about it.
Well, I don't know if I put everything in there.
Car accident.
I picked and chose. I was in Dallas with the car accident.
Okay, you
So
know
it
about the
was
cars.
about 4 at that time. So I had moved to Dallas from Atlanta at that point in time. And so that's when they went to visit their father and their stepmother. They had my ex had a new child with his new wife, a baby, a little boy. And so they spent the summer, a month in the summer with their father. And the day before they were supposed to come home, I was in a meeting on a Friday and the stepmother's phone was calling me. And I kept ignoring the call because I was thinking she was just trying to coordinate, like pick up the next day, because we would usually drive and meet halfway between Dallas and Houston. I ignored the call a bunch of times. Finally, I answered the phone call because a different Houston phone number called me. I stepped out of the meeting and was standing in my office lobby when I answered the call, and it was the Harris County Sheriff's Office calling me to make sure that I had been informed of the car accident. So it was, the stepmother had been sideswiped and zigzagged her car across the Beltway, which is about 5 lanes wide in rush hour traffic. She was very fortunate that they did not get hit by any other vehicles, and all the other vehicles avoided them, but they did hit the guardrails multiple times going back and forth after they were hit. And so my son was on the side of impact. It's not the first scenario, but it's the first scenario that brought me to my knees was when I was standing in my grandmother's house and I knew I needed to know that my husband was leaving me and I was pregnant. This is the second time that I fell to the ground to my knees. And, there's just been those moments where you find yourself like it brings you to your knees, like literally, not even figuratively. You just have no other, like your legs just give out on you. And I remember being on the floor and the sheriff's officer is telling me information. And apparently my daughter was on the other side. And so they sent her injuries were minimum. They sent her and the infant to one hospital and they sent the stepmother with my son to a different hospital. And, now I've got 4 hours apart from us and I have sole custody. And so I'm like trying to get on the phone with my mother and get somebody to get to the hospital to be with my kids while I drive there because I'm the one that makes medical decisions, just handling all of that and dealing with all that. So I was on the floor and they picked me up. The receptionist came running over and grabbed my boss out of the meeting and they picked me up and put a chair underneath me and, kind of like, it's okay, breathe. But in my head, I was already going through all of those role play of I've got to call my mom. I got to do this. I got to call this. I got to make sure they have my kid's insurance card. I've got to do that. I've got to get in the car. I've got to drive there. I mean, it was literally while I was on the floor, all of that was just going through my head of the million of things that I need to do.
Oh man, I can't even imagine what you were feeling at that point. The amount of adrenaline and the not knowing. So what was what had to be like the most intense feeling you were feeling at that point when you
The most intense feeling was the fact that my kids were separated. And that was what the police officer said to me. She was it was a female officer and she said, "Ma'am, I didn't even know to call you. Like when we called your ex-husband and told him about the car accident, he didn't mention you, and we didn't know to notify you. So I only found out to notify you because your daughter, when we were putting her in the other ambulance, she was crying because she was leaving her other brother and she didn't want to leave her little brother. And that when she says, and they said, no, your mom's going to be okay. And my daughter at that point was like 6 years old, maybe 7 years old. And she says, no, that's not my mother. My mother is Leslie Alvarez, and she works for, and she names off the community in Dallas, in McKinney, Texas. And you need to call my mom. And that's how the police officer knew to call me. So the accident had already happened, and like people were already in route places, but my ex hadn't even called me to tell me about it. And so the officer felt like there was a problem, there was a disconnect in the relationship, which there was. We were constantly fighting the entire divorce. He didn't ever notify me of the accident. I only found out about it because the police officer looked for my number in the stepmother's phone.
Oh wow. I gotta tell you, I was telling you when you first talked about your ex, there's a lot of bunch of four-letter words that are popping up in my mind. They're popping up again. So yeah, I can't, I can't even imagine it. That would drive me nuts. But I will say one thing for your daughter. In my day, my parents ran through me through the friggin' gamut. Like I knew my name, my address, my parents' names, my phone number, my dad's phone number since like 5. They made me repeat it over and over and over again. They played games with me. They did all this stuff. Where does she work? What's your dad's work number? What's your no, back then there was no cell phones. What's your dad's work number? What's your mom's work number? Blah blah blah. And occasionally I would imagine they probably didn't like that because I just call my mom at work just to say hi, and she's like, Brad, I'm working right now. Did you need something? I'm like, no, I just wanted to say hi.
I miss
Well,
you.
yeah. So they probably didn't like that, but that your daughter knew all that information and to get to their stepmother's phone and that's primo. That was
Yeah.
great. And then that's good parenting. Ugh, good.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
He's a good little fighter like that.
Yeah.
States her opinion.
But so that happened while you were still in Dallas, and then
Yes.
you moved to Atlanta,
Moved to Atlanta, moved to Dallas, then we moved back to Houston.
and then you moved back to Houston, right? Because you wanted to be closer, right?
So my daughter wanted to be closer to her father and wanted to spend more time with him. And so I found a job down in Houston and moved back down to Houston.
And at this point, you've got some experience, right? I mean, you got law, you've been in the law, you got some law experience, and then you got into community management. So
Mhm.
finding a job wasn't, what did you find it difficult, or did you find that it was pretty easy for you?
So
Just
in
because
my
of your experience?
industry, yeah, in my industry, it's very specific experience and designations. So I actually, because I graduated high school at 15, college wasn't an option. I didn't go to college, but I did focus on my industry designations as a community manager. So I got like every designation that the company would pay. And every time I did it, it gave me another job opportunity for $10,000 more, $15,000 more. And I just worked my way up that way through those industry specific designations. So then finding a job was really always pretty easy. It was kind of very rare that I would walk into an interview and not walk out with the offer. It was just kind of super easy for me in this industry that way to be able to grow because I had all the designations, all the experience, everything lined up for me.
So what about differences in salaries from one industry to another? Because then you went to Dallas, which I know is one market, and then you went to Atlanta, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is more. It's a higher cost of living there, right? So you might have gotten, a little bit more there. Then you might come back to Houston.
Three of those cities are pretty relatively close in the same, at least at the time in cost of living. But each job move was strategically to make me more money. So I never moved and made less money. I always made more money and lived a little better. So
Even from Atlanta to Houston.
from Houston to Atlanta, I gained about $10,000. I gained about $20,000.
Okay.
And then from Dallas down to Houston, I kind of net zero there, but Houston was definitely a little bit lower on the cost of living. And then from there, I actually made another job change to another property that was more money.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic. But did you still find that, even though you had this salary with two kids, single parent, that you still sometimes had to break out the tamale recipe?
Absolutely. Yeah. Christmas, all of that. Like I said, my kids wanted to play sports. So my son started football at the age of 4. Then he got into basketball. My daughter started playing volleyball in 3rd grade. She was doing club volleyball. Then once she hit middle school, she hit school ball as well. She played all the way through her senior year in high school. So you had club travel team fees. That's $4,000 or $5,000 a year easy, plus the school fees and private lessons and you name it. So I absolutely continued to subsidize. I think the last time I actually subsidized any money was probably about 5 years ago. Now I just make tamales for fun,
Oh, well, that's good.
like for Christmas.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. So I also imagine that, you had some great life lessons. So, and imagining that you're probably passing that on, aren't you?
Yeah. We've done a lot, so my son actually got very entrepreneurial. My daughter did too. She tried the oatmeal cookies at one point. She sold to all of our neighbors and raised enough money to be able to pay for her freshman year volleyball fees for high school, all her uniform fees and all of that. But my son, actually in 3rd grade, he came to me and he said, "Mom, would you please front me $50?" And I said, "What do you want $50 for?" And he goes, "Well, at Costco, they sell these fundraiser packages of chocolate and candy, and you'll get 100 pieces for $50, and then I can sell them for $1 a piece and double my money." I said, "Okay." So we went and we bought him the fundraiser package. He doubled his money. He went back, he bought 2 boxes, and then he sold those, and then he paid me back. And he did that at school, selling candy to all of his friends. Then from that, he went on as an adult, opened his first LLC at the age of 18 and started flipping tennis shoes. So this was at the peak of the pandemic. So he was running hundreds of pairs of tennis shoes through my house. I'd come home and there'd be all these boxes of Nikes that had just dropped that had been delivered, and he was reshipping them because they had been pre-sold. The next day I'd come home and they'd all be gone. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's got the entrepreneurial spirit for sure. He wants to make it happen.
And I think that's an appropriate word that you use in the book a lot, is hustle. And I think that is appropriate nowadays. You are an old school parent. You are not this new school, mealy mouth, excuse my language, I want to be friends with my kids type of parent,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Did you
My
find
friend now.
now they're grown?
So now they're my friends. So it's awesome.
Yeah, believe me, my dad is my best friend and he's been that way since I've been grown. But when I was growing up, he was to be feared. He was feared more often because I was bad more often. But he was great. He was my dad. I loved him when I was bad. It wasn't fun.
Like you mentioned your dad earlier, and you mentioned about how he didn't really want you to work and make money. Ironically, I was kind of like that with my kids as well.
Okay.
I let them make a little money here and there when they wanted to, but I didn't force them to. I paid for their cars. I paid for their car insurance. I paid for everything. And that's why I would still break out the tamale pot, right? So they knew I was struggling to make it happen, but they knew I was making it happen because I wanted to give that to them. I gave each of them a, reasonably newer car, had a car payment on it. And then at the end, when they were ready to buy on their own in their own name, I signed the title over. They took that was their down payment, and I gifted it to them. So they each were given something to be set up so that they didn't have to maybe struggle quite as hard.
Exactly. And I think that's the way as parents that we want to move that, right? We
Mhm.
always want our kids to do better than we did the other. My dad he grew up, well, he was on milk trucks when he was young,
Yeah.
milk trucks and we had a paper route together at one point for summer when I was at home and we split the money. And then, but when I was in school and I said, "Hey, I'd like to get a job," because all the other kids were getting jobs. That was why, because I was stupid. Um, and he was like, "No, no, 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 no. Your job is to be a kid." So you had the same thing, but he didn't mind these little things. just like you.
Yeah.
They came to you and she said, "Oh, well, I want to get this stuff for volleyball on my own." And
Right.
then you showed her. You
Yeah.
taught her how to fish.
I wanted them to be a kid, but I also wanted them to experience the things that I didn't get to experience. I didn't get to do sports. Remember what I said, my life was different. I didn't go to high school. I didn't do extracurricular activities. I didn't get all that experience, and I felt like I was missing out on things. So I really wanted them to be able to experience that and enjoy being a child, have those memories, have the homecoming, have the prom, have all that.
Excellent. So, and then you got married again,
I
right?
did. Yes. So I got married. I was 31, 32 when we got married. And it was a blended family. He had custody of his youngest son. And then I had my two. So it was my daughter, my stepson, and my son. They were stair stepped and they were literally 1 year apart in school. And unfortunately, blended families are tough. And we ended up divorced. But we've been divorced now for 10 years. We've actually been very good friends after the divorce. His son is still very close to me and to my kids. We all talk regularly. He's come to visit me when I go to Houston sometimes. He'll pick me up from the airport and we'll go to lunch and we'll talk about girls. So it's really cool.
Oh, well, that's good. So
Yeah.
during that time, did the three kids were they close?
Yes, they loved boys. We forced them together. It was bunk beds in a room together. Whether you like it or not, this is your brother. So they were forced to get close. They played video games together. They played football together. I mean, yeah.
All right, well, great. So as far as the kids were worked out, and unfortunately, it just didn't work out for you and
We had different parenting styles.
and that's what I wanted to talk to you about is why that happened. And obviously, you led right into it. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
The easiest way to say it is, he had two older children who at the time they were in their 20s and they really only came over to visit him for the Christmas check or the birthday check. And it was because he was so super military strict on them when they were growing up. And I'm pretty strict. I'm pretty, tight on my kids,
Yep.
but I do believe in certain rooms for flexibility as they were growing older. And so as they were turning into teenagers, there were certain things I wanted for my daughter, certain things that my daughter and I had been discussing throughout her life before I had even met this man. That was the plan for when she turned 16, when she turned 17, things like that. And he just kind of wanted to derail all of that. And I was not comfortable with that because I said to him, my kids, I want my kids to want to come home and be with me. I want my kids to come back and want to spend time with me. And your kids really didn't want to even spend time with you. So you're running your kids away by being overly strict. And I'm trying to be more of a middle of the ground. And we just couldn't agree on that because it was his house. He was the man, his way or the highway. After as many years and many struggles that I had put into my kids, the relationship that I had with them, I just couldn't put them second in that situation and let all the hard work that I had done in building a strong, solid relationship with them go to waste because it was going to go downhill if I stayed. So I chose to go ahead and get a divorce.
Wow. I mean, that would be almost tougher, I would think.
It
I
was.
mean,
Yeah, it was. Because you got somebody that cheats on you. That's easy to be able to be mad, angry, and walk away from, right? This wasn't a cheating situation. This was, I just don't fundamentally agree with how you're doing this. And we're going to keep fighting about this because these are my children. Even our therapist was like, why are you letting this man tell you what to do with your children? You've had these kids for 10 plus years without him and you've got a solid relationship with them. Why would you let him ruin your relationship with your children? And I had to wake up and say that this isn't going to work. So, yeah.
you are one of the strongest people that I have ever met emotionally, because like that has got to be just the toughest thing. There are no three strikes when it comes to cheating. You're like, you cheat, you're done, I'm out.
Mm.
That's it. And it makes it super easy, right? They did something totally wrong. Where this is literally just a fundamental parenting style, a little bit of a disagreement.
Yeah.
And you ended up having to dissolve your relationship because of that. So
Yeah. I actually even told him at one point, I was like, if you can just let me do this for the next 3 to 4 years, they will be out of the house and we will have nothing to fight about anymore. Just give us like 4 to 5 years. And he just couldn't do it. So it
So
wasn't
I'm
work.
so sorry that you had to go through that. So you had talked about the fact that you started work at 15, and you got all these great certifications and everything else, but something was missing, I think, and you ended up
Didn't have a college degree.
right.
So at 32, I did try to go back to school. I did some community college, paid my way along the way. But then when the kids got into high school, with high school sports, club sports, all of that, obviously the money was going towards them more. And that had to be the focus. And so I stopped. I was finishing my sophomore year when I stopped. When I took my daughter for a parent wine and cheese event at her new private college that she had gotten accepted to with like a $64,000 a year tuition. It was a huge, really nice college, great opportunity for her. I was talking to one of the deans and he said something about, "Oh, you don't have a degree?" I was like, "Yeah, she's a first time, college student, truly. I mean, like I've gone to school a little bit, but I haven't graduated, so it doesn't really quite count." And so he says, "Oh, well, you should go back to school." And I said, "No, I really can't afford it. I mean, with the aid that we're getting for her and such, it's really already stretching my resources way too thin, and we're going to have to take some loans out." And he says, "Well, the college financial aid system, the more people that go to school from the same household, the more aid you get." And I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yes, they adjust your gross income based on the additional people, especially if you're the parent that's
Yeah.
going back to school." I was like, I have to look this up. So I looked it up. Sure enough, I went back to school. I carried 18 credit hours at a full time, including summer, while working full time. I started my first junior semester, the same day that my daughter started her freshman year.
Wow.
I call
And
it a 2-for-1 special because it
yeah,
ended up being about the same amount of money that we took loans out for, but this time we both ended up graduating with a degree.
that's amazing. I can't even imagine what your daughter was thinking because your daughter didn't have to work when she was in college, right?
No, and she told me, she's like, "Well, I guess I don't have any excuse not to be successful if I'm only doing 15 hours and you're doing 18 and working full time."
Well, and your son's still at home.
Yes, he was still at home at the time.
So you got to take care of the son. And you get now, of course, he's what, like 16 or 17 at this
Yeah,
point. So he is kind of self-sufficient. He could do his own
a
stuff.
little. Yep.
I mean, still 16, 17, and a boy with no front was not a closed frontal lobe. We still have those
Yeah,
issues.
exactly.
But here you are, 18 credit hours, full-time job, and then not a job that's really 9 to 5 all the time, right? Sometimes you got to go
Right.
out during the
Yeah.
night to the
You have
site.
emergencies, you have all kinds of crazy stuff that happens. You've got board meetings that happen at night. Yeah, you've got lots of stuff happening.
And you're a single parent with a household. Oh my God. That's amazing. Just the thought of it. But you had such drive to get it done. That is amazing. Those are the biggest life lessons right there. So anytime that you needed something extra, the tamales came out.
Yep.
You taught that lesson to your kids, and here your 18-year-old is being a sneakerhead
Yep.
and selling and reselling sneakers, which is huge right now. And so you taught them that. So I guess the only thing that I can ask you is to somebody out there that finds themselves as a single mom and they're struggling, what would be your advice to them as their first couple of steps that they can do to start becoming more independent and kind of off of doing what they can to stay off government subsidy?
Yeah. So in my book, I actually talk about a philosophy of living in the gap. You're living in the gap when you make too much money to qualify for government assistance, but you don't make enough money to fully pay for your actual household expenses, right? That's the gap. And it's a problem because a lot of parents, single parents especially, I talk about one example of one in my book, that they will decide to take a step back from their career and go on to government assistance because it's just easier. than trying to, rob Peter to pay Paul consistently. I struggled. I mean, there were weeks and months where it was pay the car payment or pay the daycare. I'd get 2 weeks behind on the daycare so that I could pay the car payment. Then I'd pay the daycare, then I'd get behind on the car payment. And you just kind of had to do what you could do until I had the time to break out the tamale pot. Because, like you didn't have time. I'm working full time. I couldn't break out the tamale pot every week. I had to like wait till like Thanksgiving week or something, and then I could catch up on my bills by doing tamales and selling them, and then catching up on all my bills. I have a ring that I bought myself for Mother's Day in 2008, and I've probably pawned that ring at least a dozen or more times to be able to pay the bill. And then I got to go back and get the ring. And I've bought that ring over and over and over again. And, my kids know the story, and I know the story, and I talk about that all the time. But that's the thing is, don't you look for a way to subsidize somehow. I did Tupperware. I did Pampered Chef. I did anything I could to make a few extra bucks to help me to be able to rob Peter to pay Paul during those gap years. And those gap years sometimes lasted longer than I would have liked them to have lasted. There were good years, before 2008 crashes and stuff. We're like 2006 and 7 were doing really well. I was on a good trajectory till 2008 hit. But, stepping back and just throwing your hands up and allowing government assistance to take over was just never an option for me. It was never a goal of mine. It was never what I thought would set the right example for my kids or put them in the right mindset for their own personal growth. Constantly had to think about the example that I needed to set for them. And that was, I have to hustle. I've got to show them that that's what matters. You can get there if you want to.
And I think that's probably the biggest lesson is you can get there if you want to. You have to, and I do this in endurance sports all the time, is like figuring out where your limits are, being realistic about them, but also knowing that you can overtake those limits. We can do it in sports, you can do it in business, and you can do it in life. It's just allowing yourself, giving your permission to go, hey, you know what, this is going to be hard. I'm going to have to sacrifice, but I have to dig in and I got to do it. If this is to benefit yourself, to benefit your kids, to benefit your family, to benefit maybe you're taking care of an elderly parent and there's some extra bills you got to take care of. Well, Leslie uses tamales, but there's Uber and Lyft where literally all you got to do is download the app and get in the car and ride. You know what I mean?
Cleaned houses at one point. You can find so many different ways. I used to find free items that people would list on Craigslist for free, and I'd pick them up and gather them and have a garage sale sometimes and sell them. I mean, again, there's a million different ways you can come up with extra money when you need it if you are creative enough and are motivated, because you've just got to get out there and do it.
Exactly. And it's like, oh, I heard a great quote. The pathway to what's most real is through the hardest things that you can do. So what's real is, we have bills to pay, we've got our normal life. And then there's the things that we want on top of that. Mm-hmm. So the hardest things that we can do will show what you're truly made of. And again, that's my biggest message to people. I use fitness and I use examples of people that have done things they never thought possible. People that never ran a day in their life and are running 100-mile races, right? People never swam a day in their life and doing Ironman triathlons. That's that thing. And then there's people like Leslie who thinks outside the box and goes, hey, I need to get my kids some knee pads. I need to get them enrolled in football. I don't have it. Make some tamales, right? So that's that's your biggest lesson is the title of your book.
Yep.
When life gives you lemons, make tamales. If life gets sour, get spicy. So
how I can.
Yeah, it is absolutely amazing. And again, Leslie, I'm a big fanboy. I got one last question, or was one little story I'd like for you to tell us. Leslie also has her own business now. She has opened up a consulting,
management,
community management and consulting. It's called Community Ace. So tell us about how you started that, when you started it, and how it's going.
Yeah. So 6 years ago, I started consulting as a side hustle. Then about a year and a half ago, I decided, my son and I actually talked about it, and we decided to go ahead and turn it into a full service management company. So we launched it in July. We've got about 14 clients now, which is amazing for being launched for, barely half a year. I've got more contracts pending, 30 or more bids in the pipeline. So it's awesome. We're growing. We've got our first full-time employee already, other than ourselves. It's just awesome. So we're doing great with that and really looking forward to growing that.
Wow. So this is a project with your son.
Yes, he's helped to support and provides me additional assistance, manpower hours. Like he calls it family indentured servitude.
So I love that. But my day job is I'm in IT. I do IT project program management, that type of thing. And it's kind of like, but we always talk about when the boss says, all right, we're going to happy hour. Okay, great. Mandatory fun.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Man,
Black Friday this year for Thanksgiving, I told my daughter, I was like, okay, so Friday's going to be family work day. We're all going to sit at the dining room table with our laptops and we're going to work on different things that we need to get done.
did your daughter graduate?
Oh, she's been graduated. Yes.
Yeah.
She has her MBA actually now as well. She works in procurement.
Nice. You tell her the congratulations. I know it's been 4 years, but I have my MBA.
She just ran
I
her first
understand.
half marathon this morning.
What?
This morning. Yes.
Oh my God, that's fantastic. You tell her that if she wants to get faster, or if she wants to get better, you give me a call. I'll coach her.
Okay.
No problem. Oh my God, that's fantastic.
Yes.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah, see the parallels? See what I'm saying, Leslie? That's what I'm talking about. All right. But Leslie, hey, listen, I really appreciate you being on the show. I think you have given an undetermined amount of lessons and an experience that we need. The reason why I do this is to give people nuggets of information that they can use to increase their potential and get to the life that they so want. And most of the people that listen are people that are sitting on the fence. Where do I go? I've got a dead end job, or I'm not happy in my job. I want to do something different. And every single episode gives a little bit more information. If you're taking one nugget from this and you make it forward and you've been successful, then we have done our job. So, Leslie, thank you so much. If you are watching this on YouTube, if you can go ahead and hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell so you always know when another episode is dropping, I really appreciate that. If you're on Apple or Spotify and you'd like to give us a review, please do that. I don't even care if it's a bad review. I'm so cool with feedback. I just want to make this the best podcast that I could possibly make it. I want to be the best and make sure it's of value. So let us know, and it'll help us to evolve this podcast. Again, Leslie, I'm a huge fan. I love what you do and I love what you stand for. I give you all my blessings and all the success in the world on your new venture with Community Ace. I wish you all the best that you could possibly have. Happy holidays. Yeah, I really hope to be speaking with you again sometime soon, because there's a couple of things that we can go through. One last thing. When life gives you lemons, make tamales.
Molly.
That's her book. That will be specifically linked in the show notes along with her website, lesliealvarez.com. And I'll throw in Community Ace for all those people out there that are looking for management or management advice. If you are a part of a gated community or a part of a HUD or something, and maybe you're part of you're on the board and like a little bit of advice, contact Leslie. And then Leslie has one more little surprise for us.
Yes. So I have another book coming out at the end of February. It'll be on Amazon.com and it will be called Hot Mess Express.
Perfect. Oh, love that. Hot Mess Express. So look out for Hot Mess Express. Thank you, Leslie, for everything you do. Thank you all for listening, watching, and enjoying the show. And we'll see you in the next one.